All right, it's 1:30. We welcome you to feel free to take a look on your way out of our beautiful former city hall being demolished. Where, if you look, a lot of the city employees aren't shedding a lot of tears because it was in pretty rough shape. So, with that, we will begin our liquor control agenda. Agenda item number 1 is approved minutes of the November 21st, 2018 meeting. Hopefully, everybody has had a chance to check it. If there are any changes or corrections. Otherwise, we would accept a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 2A, review liquor applications, and A is application to issue a Class F alcoholic beverage license to Touchmark at Harwood Groves LLC, doing business as Touchmark, to be located at 1200 Harwood Drive South. Steve.
Just as it says, a Class F license is food license. You know, they have to serve more food than they do alcohol. And the alcohol is to be served from a separate room where it's mixed and poured. With this one, it was kind of interesting because as I was talking to them, if it was going to just be for their residents, it would be alcohol within your residence, within your home. They wouldn't have needed a license. But they said that they do want to have, they have nights when they'll have, show movies and things like that, and guests will come to be with the residents. And so they want to be able to sell the alcohol and to provide it to the residents also. So after we talked with them and worked our way through it, it seemed like the F license was the best fit for them. So we did do the background check. There was nothing significant in there.
Any other questions? Grant, I don't know if you have, is that there isn't really anything as from your perspective?
No concerns.
And how about, since our law enforcement aren't here, I don't know if they did a background check. It didn't look to me like there was any concerns there.
Nothing showed up on the background check. It was as clean as they come.
With that, any other comments? Otherwise, we'll accept a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? The only added discussion I will add is, so my mom was in a nursing home and they had like a bar in there. That was the most awesome thing. I said, hey, I'll move in there. This looks like a pretty great place to go. And my mom did not have that as an option. So, but anyway, it's a great thing. And I do think you want it to make it feel like home. And that's part of it. So,
Great.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. 2B, application to transfer a Class C alcoholic beverage license from Men's Hair World LLC, doing business as Hair Salon, located at 1801 45th Street South, Suite L1, to Men's Hair World LLC, doing business as Men's Hair World, to be located at 1801 45th Street South, Suite L1. Denial recommended. Steve.
So this is just, it's a transfer request. The person that had the hair shop at 1801 45th Street South has moved, sold the business to one of her employees, and then they were trying to transfer the license. There's significant criminal history and credit history issues with this one, mostly the credit history side, and so the chief is recommending denial on this one. And again, this is not the primary function of the business. Primary function is haircutting. This was supposed to be an enhancement to their product or to their business, and so I don't know if there's any questions about that.
I guess my main thing is, in the past, I think if they had issues like that, we gave them an opportunity to, well, and if anybody's here and wants to speak to the issue, they sure can, but what we did, didn't we give them the opportunity to kind of clear their record and then come back and apply? I don't know if that's...
And I think the chief, and he's not here obviously, but I think he reached out to her and let her know what he was going to be recommending, and told her why and give her that opportunity.
So I guess, and obviously I don't want to speak for the chief, and I don't think the applicant is here either, but I guess what we'd like to do is send that message. If you get your things resolved and want to reapply for the license, I think we'd be welcome to take a look at it again.
Sure.
I don't know if that sounds good to
So
anybody.
if we deny today, is this person still able to come back and apply again?
Pardon me?
If we deny it today, are they able to apply again?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
With that, if there's any further discussion, otherwise we'd accept a motion.
I'd move to deny.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, number 3 is the POLD discussion, and Grant, you're going to lead us on that.
Thank you. I'm actually not going to lead on this. I actually was approached by Carol Schlossman, who was in the audience. And this was briefly discussed at the last Liquor Control Board meeting, and I just wanted some more information about it. And she's willing to come forth today and give this presentation so the board can learn a little bit more about the concept.
So come on up, and wherever you feel more comfortable, you can sit there or sit up here or whatever works for you. We are very flexible, so.
She does have a slideshow, so, and
That works.
And it might be easier to be there just because then I think you can control it a little bit. And if you need any technical assistance, don't ask me. You'll have to ask him because that is not our strong point.
Sounds good. My name is Carol Schlossman, and I'm on the board of the Downtown Neighborhood Association. I'm also here in via the Neighborhood Coalition, and we've had numerous meetings with city officials and across town. So this is another education and learning and understanding environment. It's a new concept to our town, so we want to start it with that. So today our topics, and I'm running this, I take it, huh? Yep. Why the need for POLD, sources of POLD information and feedback, what is POLD, and steps to implement it. So why the need for POLD? POLD is a tool. It's just one of many tools that the city can use for liquor oversight and enforcement. It shows more accountability for both the license holders as well as for the Liquor Control Board and the commission in general, as well as the licensing office, which is Mr. Sprague's. Currently, there's no easy way to get information on patterns or trends that are directly tied to any one establishment. And we have challenges with other of the data-driven measures. License holders, as I said, have increased accountability and also transparency when you can use data-driven information. Across the board, all the way from Vermont, New York, Boston, Seattle, Washington, Utah, it's going in Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri. Iowa's looking at establishing a statewide ordinance. Minnesota has it in 38 different vicinities. They see reductions in incidences when there's oversight as well as this data-driven approach. It reduces binge drinking, and we all know that Fargo has been labeled the drunkest city in the country as well as a binge capital, which we are not proud of. We are very, very proud of our entertainment establishments, our restaurants, our retailers, and those that do a great job we are in full support of and would like that economic driver to stay in place. We want to make sure we do not have underage consumption, and we have reduced traffic incidences, and that is what they have found to be reduced across the country. It is very hard to actually track some of these changes because each city, each state has their own variety of ordinances written, so it's very hard to get a rolled up measure for them. So what does POLD do? It generates data-driven trend and pattern information. That means no one single piece of place of last drink is in itself important. What is really important is the overall pattern that is seen, first by the police and then by the city. It identifies hotspots for overservice. It spurs follow-up dialogue, and that dialogue is what we see as most critically important in our cities, and has been found in other cities. Because through open dialogue, you can identify why incidences are occurring and if it's something cultural within an organization or if it's a one-off. And we all know that sometimes people lie. So we're not looking at any one incident. It is, again, the pattern. Through the dialogue, it identifies ways to mitigate the behavior. It engages in solutions, and it provides information to support transparency when penalties might have to be issued. In Minnesota, they've had very, very few penalties ever associated with it. It's through the dialogue that they've had the most reduction in the incidences. So we talked to the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association, and they are a police entity and association who works very hard on good enforcement of liquor laws. And what they have seen is 50% of people driving under the influence had their last drink at licensed establishments. Minnesota found the same trend, about 50%. The other 50% happen at home or other places. Increased enforcement on establishments identified by DUI incidences or other alcohol-related incidences, there's a 36% decrease. And similarly, intervention reduces incidences. The National Transportation Board in 2012 recommended across the United States that POLD be adopted because it curbs impaired driving. And if any of you have ever had a friend killed by a DUI incident, you understand how important that is. It also reduces healthcare costs, especially those immediate high-risk incidences that you have when the first responders have to rescue somebody from their state. POLD supports current Fargo ordinances, so we're not asking for a big new ordinance, it's in support of the ones we have. And it's related to the termination, suspension, revocation, and sanctions, of course, and that is the toughest outcome, which very seldom happens because of that open dialogue and people willing to take measures to prevent it. It's also directly related to 25-1509 and 2515-01, mandatory service training, as well as the law specifically states that it is against the law to overserve or to serve an intoxicated individual. And overserving to a person has to be witnessed by the police, and that's usually an undercover police officer, and that creates a challenging way to deal with resources. And the 25-1501 is related to underage compliance. So sources of POLD learning and feedback to date, we've talked to the neighborhood associations, and they're in full support of this. Minnesota Police Chief Mickelson of Osseo, Minnesota, was the lead in Minnesota to get this going. It started in 2013 and was implemented in, I believe, up to 38 of the cities thus far. So between Chief Mickelson and a Partnership for Change, which is out of North Memorial Hospital, they worked together, and they brought police chiefs from across the various counties around Minneapolis together to discuss how they could improve the state of health, livability, and reduce alcohol-related incidences. We've also talked to the cities in Minnesota. We've talked to Mr. Sprague, and we've talked to Mr. Pepcorn, and we've talked to Mr. Grant, and we've talked to the mayor and Mr. Mickelson. We've also talked to several other commissioners, or at least one other commissioner. We had a very robust discussion with the police department. It was really a great dialogue, and we learned a lot, and we believe they learned a lot. And I know they're looking forward to seeing what kind of decisions are made around it. Currently, we have several issues with our oversight checklists. I know we have checklists in the restaurant industry that you check off the pros and the cons of what's happening internally, is it clean, et cetera. Well, the checklist for alcohol is mainly that they attend an alcohol review before license renewal. That's mandatory. The compliance checks have been a challenge with resources. In 2017, 72 establishments were checked. This year, 95 have been checked out of about 198, which is a 48% compliance rate. And of those, 16 failed. That's 17% of the 95. So the issue with that is you have to use off-duty police officers who are volunteering their time. They do get paid, but it's after duty. And also, when an underage person goes into an establishment, the state law says that establishment can take their ID away if they try to purchase alcohol. The police department then has to go pick up the ID and return it to the individual. and that makes it very difficult for a lot of underage people to want to even volunteer for this activity. So I'm actually impressed that we even got 95 times 2 people to volunteer for this. In the ordinance for underage serving, it says that, and it was written absolutely in good faith, I know, that they were going to try to do 4 compliance checks on each establishment annually. And right now, we're not even hitting the 50% benchmark. Server training, 49% of the establishments did not meet server training requirements. The benchmark we're using is West Fargo at the time of license renewal uses 80% of servers. Now, we have a 3-month waiting period, or grace period, I should call it, in Fargo, that people who are serving or a manager of that establishment has 90 days to get service training. Well, 75% of all the servers were trained, but less than 49% of the establishments actually had met that 80% requirement. So those checkpoints are challenging. So when we looked at POLD, we thought this is a good way to fill in some of those measures. So POLD works at the point of an arrest. So we are not looking at shutting down the fun in any establishment or having it invasive in any establishment. Again, we are strong supporters of economic development and a robust and healthy entertainment industry in Fargo. Those arrests can include DUIs, assault, disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, domestic, or any other type of alcohol-related call, such as for medical. Now, the police take in a lot of evidence already at these, once they make an arrest. And included in the POLD, and these are often already in the police's database, the gender, type of incident, time and day, those are already collected. The blood alcohol concentration, underage distributors, if they're identified, average blood alcohol concentration of an establishment once POLD starts recording the place and an amount where the person last cited they consumed. Now, I want to be very specific on this. We know people lie. That's a given. And we also know when people are arrested, they can lie. But we're looking at patterns and trends, and those are the big blinking lights in a data chart that are pointing out something egregious has happened. So again, it's data-driven, tracks patterns and trends, links behavior to outcomes, opens a dialogue, identifies the why there is overservice, and engages in solutions. Officers are trained to collect this information so we don't have to worry about officers overstepping their bounds on it. The police have a database, and I'm sorry, I have not been good at doubling up on my efforts here. So there is a police dashboard that is used. The National Liquor Law Enforcement Association has developed one, and it has been used across many states and adapted. It is online, it's immediate, it's easily accessible, it's easy to enter. It usually takes about 30 seconds. It's useful and meaningful. And when I say useful and meaningful, that only happens if it is consistently used. It also brings up on the dashboard when that data is entered if what that average POLD data trend is for any specific area. So when Minnesota adopted in 2014, and the other cities joined, Edina, Chaska, Wayzata, Robbinsdale, Oakdale, White Bear Lake, Stearns County Sheriff, and it's growing, as well as Golden Valley, Brooklyn, Plymouth, Mankato. So you can see it's a robust list. So this is what that database showed. In one instance, after a year, it appeared 43 of 57 of the incidences in one city, Plymouth, were from one establishment. That was in 2014. Now, this dates back to 2009 when the police started talking to that entity about some of the issues they were dealing with, and they could not get this entity to change their practices. So with the poll data, it became very, very evident there was a pattern and egregious behavior. And so through adjustments, they were opened actually 1 hour later than the other bars in the vicinity. And they also terminated their food at 11 o'clock. And so they reduced their opening by 1 hour, and they left their kitchens open, and then they increased server training. And since that time, they have been consistently in compliance with relicensing. It's effective. Now, it has to be understood that any one polled entry isn't direct proof that somebody has overserved. It's the collection of multiple pieces of data that show the patterns and trends. So some of the ways that these incidences can be mitigated is through looking at the specials, through supervision, through training, through security, through hours, through pricing, and through food. It's very important for establishments to understand if it's cultural or if it could even be one server who is really messing up. An example that we had a few weeks ago, one of our board members was at a local downtown establishment at 1:45. They called for last serve, and then they walked around afterwards and continued to serve shots, as many shots as anybody wanted from 1:45 to 2 a.m. And that is when you have a lot of people hitting the streets that are in no condition to drive, walk, or function. So points of integration. The police are incredibly important to POLD. Again, in Minnesota, it was led by the chiefs of police of each city and by the health department. It was also sanctioned by their city councils and commissions. It takes training, it takes follow-through, and the good news is that it actually in the long term reduces resources because they know where they should be pointing those resources. The health department, licensing, liquor control board, and the city commission all have to be integrated. And the reason it's so important for liquor control and the city auditor's department is they know if it is not connected to licensing, there is very, very little benefit if there's no enforcement. So by far, the majority of these establishments are well-run and have good intention. And so it is only those who really want to thumb their noses at our already existing ordinances that would have to have more resources directed to. And it's very important for the license holders to be educated on this. In Minnesota, when they rolled this out, there was almost no pushback from the license holders, which surprised a lot of the police chiefs. And the reason is they realized that if they complied with the existing law, I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. And it very, very, very seldom happened to, by far, more than the majority. So those that were approached with POLD incidence patterns, they have been worked through, and as far as I've heard, there has been nobody in Minnesota that's lost their license. It's all been done through behavior changes. Do you have questions?
Any questions from the people up front or people in the audience? I guess this is kind of our first information about it. Grant, I don't know if you have any comments about it?
No, I don't. I appreciate Carol being here today and to describe it more in detail. Like I said, we touched on it last time, and it's a good data tool. And I just kind of wanted her to describe it a little bit more in detail. I think that she did that. So it's good information from us, and I don't have any further questions personally.
And I'm a little disappointed that the law enforcement isn't here, because I do think that if we do something like this, it's more work for them. And I guess my opinion is we already know if we have a problem establishment, we know who they are. And I think Chief Todd already knows that. And so I guess my concern is when you ask someone who's been arrested, where did you have your last drink? To me, that's not good data. I want good data that's scientific and not from somebody who's just been under arrest. So that's a concern for me. And I do think it's additional cost and additional time for our law enforcement. And to me, that's my main concern. And so I don't know if you.
Yeah, when we talked to the police department, we addressed that issue, or we talked in length about that issue.
Okay.
And most of the time, the information they get is accurate. And yes, occasionally they get somebody that does lie about where they had their last drink. But again, you're looking at a big pattern trend, you're not looking at any one instance. They also have talked to, I know they have followed up with some of their own resources. We had met with Deputy Chief Renner on this and had a lot going back and forth. When they went through their database to try to identify specific license holders, that is not the way the information is collected, and they had no way to connect any incidents to any one establishment. And we do know that a lot of the incidences continue. That trend line has not changed. And so that is why these communities who are implementing POLD are seeing a reduction. So it's for a good reason. It's not just to collect data. And again, it is only as good as you use information. And as a liquor control board, I would think you would want the best information that is data-driven possible, especially since we don't have compliance checks that are robust enough, nor licensed server training that's robust enough. So this is another really smart tool that's being used across the country to help fill in all those gaps.
I guess I would disagree with your statement that we don't do enough compliance checks, so they're not robust enough. I think that, to me, it's a little bit of entrapment. When you send a minor intentionally into a bar, you're trying to catch someone. And as a small business owner, I have enough problems trying to run a business without people trying to induce me into breaking the law. So I don't support those myself. And I would challenge people with the licenses now. It's tremendously difficult to catch a fake ID. I wish we would beef up our consequences for the people that are trying to do that, because the majority of minors that get caught, there are no consequences, and I do think we should look at that. But I would challenge anybody in the audience, the fake IDs that they have now, unless you're in the business every day, it's impossible. And so I think it's a challenging thing. All right, I didn't mean to take up too much, but if anybody has any more, but I appreciate you bringing up this, and I do think it's something that we need to continue the discussion on. I think we've been open to meet with you, and I do think our downtown is going to be more and more of an entertainment area, and so we have to make sure it's safe and well-run and all that stuff. So,
On a side note, the Downtown Neighborhood Association, in their last annual meeting, they did ask people how safe they felt. And 2/3 of them said, usually I feel safe. We don't think usually is good enough, and we worry about a tipping point.
and I totally agree with that, and I do think that's, and a lot of it is perception. We have to make sure people feel safe when they're downtown, and so that's up to us and the neighborhoods and all that. So let me ask you, what is how do you want to proceed? What's your next step? And I'm very disappointed that law enforcement wasn't here, because I think what we're asking for is a lot, has to do with them. I don't know if you agree with that, but.
Absolutely. I think the next step is for law enforcement to truly do some deep digging and good information from other cities that are using it effectively, and from some who have failed in their usage of it, to see what they've done right and what they've done wrong. And when it continues to be being implemented across the United States, that shows that there is some good outcomes from it. And again, when I talked about the compliance checks, POLD would only identify those underage people if they're actually arrested, and there then is more impact on them at that time too. So the first step absolutely is for the police to understand it, find out what's good about it, what are the challenges, and then for that then to be discussed internally in City Hall with all the departments that are affected by it, and that includes the Department of Health and, of course, the Auditor's Department and the Liquor Control Board, so that they know what this is about and how to best implement it. At that point, I think it would be, if everything that we have seen and heard from across the country is supported, then an ordinance would be written.
So can I ask you, so then we'll receive and file this today and continue this, and then I think I would appreciate it if your group would continue to meet with us, and I do think it's kind of an ongoing thing.
Yes.
And I think we've been pretty good about meeting, but I do think we need to maybe make it a little more official so we make sure that everyone's involved and participates. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, I don't know if there's any, and Grant, I think as far as the health department, I mean, what they talk about in here, there are health issues for the city and things like that, so I think it does apply.
Yeah, I think it applies, like she's pointed out, Tim, and police and the health department, would ultimately take a lead on it. And so we do have to be in more conversations, collaboration, and we've met individually, it seems like, but I think you're right, have a collaborative effort and communication is the key.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing I'd like to do is include the retailers and also to give them a little bit of homework to find out, more than likely you have people in these different cities, they're not that far away, you could talk to and from their perspective to hear how it's gone for them and also get your view on it too. So I do want to include them in the group down the road. So I think
They're
that's.
stakeholders for sure.
I don't know if anybody else has any more comments, or otherwise, we'll thank you very much for the presentation.
You're
That was-
welcome.
It was very interesting, and so we'll receive it, and we'll continue to work on it. But I do think that our downtown it's different than it was. Go ahead.
One thing is, this is not just for downtown. This is actually Cass and Clay wide, because our database it covers both counties.
Right.
So it could be implemented by all three cities as well as the two counties.
And I do appreciate that, and that may be something where we might want to include West Fargo, the Cass County Sheriff, and also Clay County and Moorhead. So that might be something, but the only thing I'm afraid of is if it gets too big, then it gets to be, you know what I mean? It gets to be too complicated. And I'm not that bright of a guy, so I like to keep it simple, and then once we figure it out here, then move it to, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, when you pull from a database, you basically pull your jurisdiction.
Okay.
So that's how that works.
I don't know if you have any more comments. Do you have a comment? Come on up, introduce yourself, and that's all right. We're not in a rush, so. Go ahead, if you don't mind just giving us your name.
Yep, no problem. My name's Dwayne Litton. I own Duffy's Bar here in Fargo. I was in law enforcement for 14 years, so I know that portion of this equation. I am a 30-year-plus veteran of a volunteer fire service out at Castleton, and I have owned my bar for the last 12 years. We currently have dram shop laws that give us what we can and can't do. And I remember this very committee had an ad hoc committee that worked for 2 years to monitor, reevaluate, and take a new look at our ordinances here in the city. I was attending one of those particular meetings at which we were looking at the offenses versus the punishments. And in that very meeting, offense number 1 was laid out, discussion was held, and the question to the chief of police was, do we have a problem with this? And the chief's answer was mostly no. Question number 2 or 3 down the line, he was asked, do we have a problem with this? He said, in my time here, we had one offense that was dealt with without any type of enforcement effort, much as she's recommending here. We currently have those efforts in place. You come and talk to us if there's a problem. If it gets out of hand, you enforce what is already on the books. As a bar owner, I appreciate the checks that we get. I appreciate that it keeps my people on their toes, keeps everybody on their toes. Again, I agree with you, Mr. Pepcorn, that this is an additional level of bureaucracy and record keeping and time consumption by a department that is already, but in her own words, Ms. Schlossman's in her own words, are already not capable of taking on the workload they currently have. Why do we want to add more? North Dakota, especially Fargo, is about as flat as it gets. You want to find out what's going on? Step outside and look. You can hear it, you can see it. The police department addresses it, and the chief in many meetings in this very room has told different respective bar owners, you got to clean up your act or else. And I think that that's still been as effective as anything else. This past year, your board has forced the mandatory meeting requirement, and I thought that worked pretty well this year. You stepped up, the chief stepped up, we all stepped up. So I think we're all on the same page, and we don't want to hurt anybody, we don't want to kill anybody. We want to have the entertainment that people are looking for in our city.
That's very good. I appreciate that. And maybe, Steve, you can talk about that. I mean, now, for our license holders, you're required to come to the annual, that's part of your license renewal. And we used to not have very much teeth in that, and now we do. So we are doing something. And I will say your comments, it doesn't hurt to review this stuff. And I appreciate your views, and I appreciate the neighbors' views. You have to look at this from all the different angles, and obviously, if we have to make a change, we want to know how much it's going to cost us and the impact on the police. That's all part of this mix. So we want to have everybody included and have a good discussion, because to me, that's part of what Tony and my job is. That's what we're supposed to do. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Steve.
Well, the change that we made on that mandatory meeting requirement was that if you don't attend, there's a financial impact now. And we think it's severe enough to cause people to attend, so.
So can I ask you, so like right now with our license renewals, everyone, they're required to come?
Yep.
So we have 100%. If you don't come,
They don't get their license renewed.
you don't get your license renewed. So to me, that's a pretty clear thing. However, I will say this, you have to look at these things, and that's part of what our job is. So we'll move ahead. Thank you. That was a lot of good discussion, and we'll make sure everybody's included, and we'll keep moving on down the road. With that, we'll move to the next item on the agenda. Number 4, discussion relating to consumption on a licensed premises after 2 a.m. Steve?
Yeah, I was hoping the chief would be here to address this. He forwarded me an email that he got from a couple of his officers that were involved in this incident. And, we had an employee, a couple of employees that maybe it looks like, of a business that stayed on the premise after hours and consumed to the point where one of the employees then appears maybe passed out or something, had vomit on her and that type of thing. And so anyway, our past practice has been that we send them a letter, require mandatory server training, remind them of the responsibilities that they have, and basically have them on a probationary basis going into the future.
So can I ask, what's the probation? Is there a specific thing? Is it the consequences outlined?
It is in the letter. I don't have the letter with me, and I don't
No.
remember exactly what it was. Looking back to Nancy to see if she
Nancy,
remembers
can you help
the
us?
time. That sounds about right. It's about 18 months, if right.
Okay. So it was kind of like we were talking about. The first infraction is this: you're on probation for 18 months. Is that correct? Then after that, if there's something else that happens, then there's a fine.
Well,
and then-
we'd probably go to sanctioning the license, I think.
Okay.
And so, I mean, it's spelled out in the ordinance, as Dwayne said. We have steps in there, and so I know the license holder is here. Don't know if you want to hear from him or not, or just follow our normal procedure.
You can, if you want to come up and speak, you can. If you don't want to, that's all right. But, okay, come on up. Give your name and address, and
My name is Jim Swanek. I own the Roundup Saloon. With me is April Christofferson. She is the manager. I've been a retailer in multiple stores here in Fargo for 38 years, soon to be 38. April has been in the liquor business for 22 years. I want to start by personally apologizing to the board for the incident at the Roundup. My employees made a mistake, but I know it's my responsibility. I feel as a longtime owner that we should be setting an example for others, and I want you to know that I take this very seriously. Both employees involved have been dismissed. Two things. Number one, it's against the law. Number two, I don't like the idea of my employees sitting around drinking free liquor. I have a copy of a note addressing drinking after hours that was posted at all my bars after the last incident, which I believe was back in July, which I forgot, but I do.
The last incident was at a different location, not yours.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And it says, anyone drinking after 2 a.m. will be terminated, no warnings, which is exactly what we did. I think it's a little bit unclear at this point. I think that what happened was that the gal involved was drinking before we closed, but then was on the premises after 2 a.m. Once again, I am very sorry about this, and at this time, I would answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Well, and I don't have that many questions, Jim, but I will say, I mean, you're one of the larger places in town, and so you have to be a leader. And so when this happens, I'm telling you, man, you have a target on you, and you already know, and so it's disappointing, and obviously, there's consequences. It's just it's one of those things where, I mean, people are watching you all the time, and you already know this. You also have a lot to lose. I mean, if you added up the things you have at risk, it's a big deal. So I just it's one of those things where I think you have to be very cautious, and it's difficult. I know it's a difficult business, but I think you have to be very careful.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Pepcorn, and I agree. And I do feel very bad about this because for all these years, we've had haven't had any of these kind of problems. And we had one now, and like I said, as someone that's been around as long as I have, I feel that I have a greater responsibility as far as setting an example to people just starting out in the business. And, like I said, this is very serious to me, and we are dealing with it.
I don't know if anybody else has any comments, but no. Okay, so I guess what we'll do is, maybe Nancy, you can update us at the next meeting too about just for a refresher, but it's basically they're on probation for 18 months, but I think it'd be good for
Follow
us.
the normal process, yep.
So do we need a motion for that? Or do we do? We do need a motion for that.
And is that placed on probation?
Just, I think just a motion to follow the normal process, or,
I'll make that motion.
okay.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 5, any other comments, any other things you'd wish to address? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. Wish everybody a happy holiday. Thank you for all you do, and we will see you next year.